to a really big agreement on trade and energy between the US and the EU. On the surface, it was promoted as a massive win for America. But a pretty compelling new analysis argues that this victory might have come with some serious hidden costs.
So, this is how the deal was sold to the public. Victory for the United States. The official story was simple, it was powerful, and it was a clear-cut win. But the analysis we're about to walk through asks a very different and very critical question.
And that is the question at the absolute heart of an analysis titled Trump's False Victory. The whole point of it is to argue that behind all the cheering and the headlines, a totally different story was playing out. One with some pretty significant and maybe even damaging long-term consequences.
All right, let's get into the first big argument from this analysis, and it's that this so-called win wasn't free. The price tag? America's reputation and its actual influence on the world stage.
The core idea here is that the deal just, well, it felt lopsided. The analysis suggests that by pushing its advantage so hard, the U.S. actually started to chip away at the very foundation of its alliances. You know, that sense of mutual trust and shared benefit.
And the analysis doesn't just say this, it brings the receipts. It uses data from the Pew Research Center to show what it calls a total collapse in global confidence. I mean, just look at this trend. You go from a 64% confidence rating in the mid-2010s, and it just plummets to a projection of barely 30%. That's like losing half the world's trust in about a decade.
And it's not just about politics, right? According to the analysis, this loss of trust has a real, tangible impact on something called soft power. Basically, how attractive a country is culturally and educationally. The argument is pretty simple. When the political trust goes, so does everything else.
And check this out. The analysis points to one really stark number to prove it. A 22% drop in international students coming to U.S. universities since 2016. And at the exact same time, it points out, countries like China and Germany are seeing their numbers go up.
Okay, on to the second major point from the analysis. And it's that this deal, far from making the transatlantic alliance stronger, might actually be making Europe a less stable, less reliable partner for the long haul.
So here the analysis really zooms in on the energy side of this deal. It frames Europe's switch in energy supply not as some simple business deal, but as a kind of economic pressure that put a really important ally in a very tight, very vulnerable spot.
And this is where you really see that pressure in black and white. It's pretty stark. The analysis points out that back in 2019, Russian gas was costing Europe about 17 euros per megawatt hour. Fast forward to 2023, and U.S. LNG costs nearly triple that at 49 euros. According to the source, that price jump wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It had huge consequences. And from that economic strain, the analysis argues you get this domino effect. It creates stress on industries, which leads to political friction inside the EU, and the end result is that the whole bloc starts to look less predictable and, frankly, less attractive to global investors.
And to back that up, the analysis points to Eurostat data. It shows a projected 18% year-over-year drop in foreign investment into the EU through 2025. And think about that timing. It's the exact period when the continent is trying to digest this new, way more expensive economic reality.
Okay, so this next point from the analysis is kind of counterintuitive. The source is basically claiming that by putting the squeeze on its old friends, the U.S. might be accidentally creating its own future rivals, stronger ones at that.
It frames Europe's recent behavior, like pouring money into its own tech, as a direct strategic reaction. This whole push for what it calls technological autonomy is presented as a direct answer to the pressure from U.S. policy.
And the proof, according to the source, is in the spending. We're looking at a projected 118 billion euros a year in tech R&D by 2025. That number means the EU is literally doubling its investment, with countries like Germany and France leading the charge to stand on their own 2 feet, technologically speaking.
But it's not just about Europe pushing back. The analysis says at the very same time, something else is happening on the world stage. It highlights the simultaneous rise of a different economic group, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which it sees as a growing alternative to the old Western-led system.
And this right here,
This is the data point that the analysis says should make everyone sit up and pay attention. According to their source, 2025 is projected to be a massive milestone. For the first time, the BRICS nations' slice of the global trade pie at 32% is set to be bigger than the G7's at 29%. That is a huge shift in global economic power.
All right, for the final section, the analysis brings the focus back home. It turns inward to look at the domestic trade-offs the U.S. is supposedly making to keep its top spot in the world. So to make its point, the source pulls out this old, classic idea in geopolitics, imperial overstretch. It's basically the theory that an empire can get so big, so spread out, that the cost of just maintaining all its commitments abroad starts to become more than it can handle, and it begins to weaken from the inside out. And then the analysis applies this idea directly to the U.S. today.
And this is the visual that the analysis uses to make its case. Just look at the difference here in the 2023 U.S. budget. You've got $886 billion for defense spending, next to just $137 billion for domestic infrastructure. That's more than 6 times as much. The analysis presents that ratio as a sign of a fundamental imbalance in the country's priorities. So, what's the bottom line here, according to the analysis? It's that this so-called victory wasn't a clean win at all. Instead, it argues the deal threw a delicate strategic balance completely out of whack, setting off ripples that could have some really serious, long-term consequences for everyone involved.
And that's the final, really provocative question the analysis leaves us with. It challenges all of us to think about this whole event not as something that's over and done with, but as a critical turning point, one that history might judge very, very differently. Was it a triumph or was it a tipping point? That is the question at the very heart of the analysis called Trump's false victory.